Hi, I'm Ernie Medina with TRB, and I'm joined today by Brendan Arbelon, one of our TRB instructors. And today we're going to talk to you a little bit about the top 3 defensive practical semi-automatic pistol modifications that we see out there in the marketplace, particularly with CCW holders and home defenders and things like that. We're going to go in this video today about those 3 things, which are red dots on your pistols, weapon-mounted lights, and trigger jobs. So first thing we're going to do is actually talk to you a little bit about red dots and those sighting systems. So Brendan's going to talk to you a little bit about that.
All right, so let's talk about red dots. Now, red dots has become a common thing on firearms now, especially in 2021. I have yet to teach a CCW class this year that has not at least had 1 or 2 red dots in that class. Now, what is a red dot? The red dot is typically mounted on top of your defensive pistol right here. Okay, now you can either get it cut or straight from the factory. Now, since we live in California, most firearms you do need to get it modified due to the types of firearms or the types of pistols you can have in California. So once you get it cut, that's what we call it modifications. Now, if you do use a red dot, make sure you do have backup iron sights, since no matter how perfect a system is, it still will fail. Just in case this fails, make sure you do have your iron sights right here, so at least you can get that in there as well. So the beauty of a red dot, right? So I'm gonna turn it off for a second. Right now, so with the dot off or dim to a point where I can't see him in the daytime, I would have to rely on my iron sights. Now, seeing that metal steel target right there, okay? Now, if I aim down, I would have to focus my front sight, right? Based on common doctrine when it comes to shooting. So since I'm focusing on my iron sights, my rear sight's blurry, my target is blurry. So if I was aiming down range, and if I were to shoot, and you tell me how many hits are on that top headshot of that steel target, I would not be able to tell you, because obviously the target's blurry and the rear sight is blurry and the front sight is obviously the one that's clear. With red dots, all you need to do, since it's a projected dot, is never take your eyes or never take your focus off the target and just superimpose the dot as you're shooting. For example, turn it on. I can immediately see where my hit was at, and I can pretty much see the target the entire time because it's clear and it's focused. That's the beauty of red dot, because it gives you the ability to target focus, which is the natural reaction of the body anyway, anytime there is a threat. So not only are you able to target focus, you have better situational awareness, and it does make one of the 5 fundamentals of shooting easier, which is sight alignment and sight picture. That's the benefits of having a red dot in your defensive firearm. Now let's talk about flashlights or weapon mounted lights. The beauty of weapon mounted light is it allows me, right, to still shoot the same way I'm shooting 99% of the time, and have the ability to turn on the light just in case you need to confirm or hit a target or see a target, right? The biggest fallacy with a lot of CCW holders is saying that they have this guy over here. Now, I still do have this guy over here, right? Now, even with your weapon mounted light, you need one of these, okay? Handheld light. Now, shooting with a handheld light is inherently difficult because you're going to be shooting with your primary hand only, okay? Now, how many times have you, as a CCW holder, if you don't actually have a weapon mounted light, shot like this? The weapon mounted light allows me to shoot the same way I'm shooting 99% of the time. Now, even with a weapon mounted light, you still do need this one in a CCW situation. If you're out and about and you haven't confirmed a threat yet, make sure you do identify the targets with your handheld light to ensure that, just in case they're not a threat, no, you're not pointing a gun at them. That's a big difference, okay? There's a difference between a handheld light and a weapon mounted light. The weapon mounted light only comes out and is used for identification if the threat level necessitates it to be used. So again, the beauty of having a weapon mounted light is I can have illumination and not lose my perfect grip when shooting a firearm. Now, when it comes to weapon mounted lights, I have 2 preferred options, One, when it comes to full size, I prefer the Surefire X300s just because of their switch right here. They have a really gritty switch. At first you think, okay, well that's bad because it's gonna prevent me from engaging the light fast when I need to. Actually, that's quite opposite. You need to be more deliberate when it comes to weapon mounted lights anyway, because you don't want to be accidentally discharging the light all over the place and giving away your position. That's why the X300 with its on and off switch being gritty allows me to actually be extremely deliberate as I am activating the light. The competitor to this one is the Streamlight TLR1, which is a good light by itself, but from my past experience drawing with the TLR1 from concealment or a duty rig, I keep accidentally discharging the light because of the fact that it has a really soft switch, or the momentary switch on that one is really sensitive. That's why I prefer the X300 when it comes to, or the Surefire X300 when it comes to full-size duty lights. Now going to smaller compact lights, which I don't have here, but I prefer the Streamlight TLR7A. It has almost the exact same switch as the X300, but it has 500 lumens for a light that is half the size of this one. Those are the two types of lights that I use, the Surefire X300 when it comes to full size, and the Streamlight TLR7A when it comes to compact lights.
Next, I'd like to talk with you a little bit about trigger modifications. Certainly there are many different options out there for trigger modifications, but we see that being one of the most prominent modifications or upgrades that people do when it comes to their defensive pistol. In one particular example here, I have a Smith & Wesson M&P Shield, and this one has a modified trigger. So essentially I've installed an Apex trigger on this particular platform, and a lot of people will modify the triggers on their firearm because of personal preference. Usually, there's nothing wrong with the trigger on a firearm coming from the factory. They're done to run perfectly fine and so on and so forth. However, most of this is driven by preference. Preference in, say, the person's finger strength, shooting abilities, and other slew of reasons. But in this particular case, I particularly modified this trigger to basically improve the trigger system. And what I mean by that is, in 2013, Smith & Wesson did have a recall on their stock triggers on their shields. Now, the trigger is essentially a plastic trigger that has a trigger safety by a hinge point on the trigger itself, which a lot of people find to be mushy or just doesn't feel right because you have a hinge point in the middle of the actual trigger itself. Neither here nor there. It's a perfectly fine trigger. It's just that some people just don't like it. Personally, I didn't like it because of the feel, as well as the fact that it already has had a recall. So I changed it out altogether and modified it to an Apex trigger that you see here. Now, unlike the stock trigger, there is an actual trigger safety on it, which protrudes from the trigger itself. And what it does is it actually makes the trigger press a little bit smoother, a little bit softer, taking it from essentially about a 4-pound trigger press down to about a 3.5-pound trigger press on this one. So the Apex trigger here works really well, and I'll show you from this angle so you can see. So a really nice slack here. I get to the wall, and from wall to break, it's really smooth and it's short. Okay, so that's another important thing when shooting. The amount of distance from the wall of the trigger to the break of the round is important. If you have long travel, typically that will lend itself to the opportunity for more disruption of the firearm as you're squeezing the trigger, thereby affecting your overall accuracy. But because of this particular trigger, it has a nice crisp wall that I know where it's at, and it has a really short wall to break that is really defined. So something like this can really be a good upgrade or modification to the stock trigger on a firearm. So another reason why people would do it. Okay. Another type of trigger modification that people do, and that's on this platform. On this one I have the SIG 229. Okay, it looks, and it is essentially the stock trigger itself. But another type of trigger modification that can be done is essentially adjusting the trigger press. And actually there's another part of it that works with the internals here, but what SIG has done, and this I sent back to the factory, is they polished up the feed ramp, changed out the spring on the slide, as well as adjusting the trigger itself from about an 8.5 pound trigger press on double action to about a 6.5 pound trigger press on double action. Okay, double action is when that hammer has to go back, all the way back, then forward to actuate the trigger. So the travel on the trigger itself is going to be longer in double action than it would be in single action. In single action, I barely have to move the trigger in order to go from wall to break. So that first round will be a long travel, but all the subsequent rounds after that will be in single action. Now, the part of this trigger modification that was done, again, using stock trigger parts, we've taken that trigger press force down from 8.5 to 6.5, and that single action press has been reduced down to about 3 pounds. So it takes about 3 pounds to go from wall to break on this particular modification. As well, the travel here on from single action from wall to break has been significantly reduced. So I'll probably give you a closer look here, but you can see the amount of travel that this finger has to go from wall to break is very, very little. So again, going from the concept of having little movement with little or less opportunity to disrupt the trigger as you're squeezing disrupt the firearm as you're squeezing the trigger is important, as it does directly translate into to accuracy. So one of the big drivers for trigger modifications, as it does relate to shooting performance, has to do with that. And then everything else around that is predicated on preference, maybe shooter's capabilities. If you have, say, shorter fingers or not as much hand or finger strength, something like the second modification on that SIG platform might be a beneficial thing that one can do, because now you're instead of having to generate that 8.5 pound trigger press, which might be hard on the double action, it would make it easier, and somebody with smaller or not as good hand strength can actually manipulate that firearm safely. So it does fall into the realm of a safety aspect. So making sure that your trigger is in good working order and certainly works for you is absolutely important. So those are some things around the trigger that we see, and is one of the most common modifications that we see in defensive pistols.
Like this video? Be sure to register and sign up for our next CCW class, and we look forward to training with you.